looking into curatorial kind of processes and implementing a framework where we could have a kind of open and honest conversation about how people curate, the different kind of approaches to curating. Anti-Curate actually started back before the building reopened, when the arts team was first formulated. So this was kind of December 2009. The building reopened in May 2010 after the big refurbishment. So there's a new team looking at how we, I suppose, approach programming, what's different about.
But you called yourself producers, didn't you?
Yeah, we called ourselves producers.
Why did you call yourself producers?
I mean, it's more trouble than it's worth, to be quite honest.
But it was a shift.
Within the visual arts, especially, that, I don't think it's such a big thing in the performing arts, but for the visual arts to have a producer, it did spark a lot of questions. But for Mac, I mean, these were decisions that were taken before the team came on board. It was about having a team who were kind of open to engaging with people outside of the organisation. It was a process, a structure, an infrastructure that would allow others from other organisations, individuals, to come in and influence the direction of the programme, which was really what Anti-Curate started out as a brief, Trevor, to look at how we kind of take a risk, how we drop the boundaries of the institutional boundaries to approaching exhibitions and visual arts projects, to look at exploring other ways of working, and through that fundamentally to learn about how we could do things different, how we could do things better, and introducing ourselves to other artists, curators who we wouldn't kind of cross paths with if we were operating in traditional circles of, the clique, if you like, of arts professionals.
So specifically allotment then, within that kind of approach that you're taking, is kind of, let's open it up, let's kind of make processes democratic, or more democratic. You can't say they were democratic, they're more democratic. What role did allotment play within that move forward for the organisation?
Well, it's been a steady build-up. It's been learning from Anti-Curate and then looking at, okay, what do we do next? How do we kind of take what we've learned from that and move forward? Allotment was very much about relinquishing control of a space, breaking it down into areas of the 10 plots, and handing those over to other voices, essentially, letting people kind of own a programme over a period of time. And that was the fundamental difference with Allotment, that it's still running. It opened in January and it's running till September. It's a 9-month programme of activity. Right. So Anti-Curate was very, very quick, the 4-day exhibitions. This was about opening up a big chunk of time to a group of individuals or groups to define those parameters themselves within the space.
But it's funny, and I can't remember who it was. I think who is it that runs Situations? What's the name? Helen Doherty was talking about work, and she was kind of saying that time is often the forgotten parameter with things, and that time is one of those things. We talk about space and whatever. So it's interesting you're talking about how time became a constituent, a fundamental part of the allotment programme. It wasn't about physical space, it was about time as well.
And relations
unfolded.
Yeah, and it's about relationships, I think. It was very much, that there's a great resource here in terms of space and opportunity to engage with audiences. There's audiences that aren't necessarily art-informed audiences. They're as diverse as you get, I think, here in Cannon Hill Park. And it's an opportunity to have a conversation with an audience and get some work to them. It's a longer term thing where there's certainly opportunity, whether we'll hear from the plot holders later, I guess, whether that's been kind of a positive thing or...
So from what I understand, part of that process was then to bring in an associate producer to trigger this kind of rollout opening up the space. So
Yeah.
could you talk about how you invited Charlie into that and why you invited Charlie into that?
I mean, as I said before, fundamentally it was about, you can't have this kind of idea and then just one person to kind of see it through and make all the decisions. So I was really keen to, having worked with Charlie before and her approach to working with artists, there's a kind of, there was a mutual kind of shared kind of feeling and ambition to working on this project. So inviting Charlie to be associate producer, it kind of gave an external perspective that with our heads down we don't often have. We're quite locked down to what we need to do. We need to have this space, we need to kind of program, we need to do a certain amount of things, but you've got a completely different perspective there. And likewise with Dan Whitehouse, with his kind of remit as next generation producer working with 14 to 24-year-olds, it was about, a large part of this is about discovering new talent, emerging talent. It's about kind of what are those relationships, who might we be working with in 10 to 15 years, a real kind of long-term kind of aspiration for this as well. But
so Charlie, what was it like for you? So what was your brief and how did you find your way through that, and what was interesting or different for you?
The brief kind of started out as a conversation, because at first I was invited to think about the project as the director of Trove, which was going to be one of the plot holders. And then it was through those sort of conversations about what Trove might do that discussion came to, actually there's loads of independent curators and organisations that could really thrive from this. So we all put our heads together, put loads of names on the table, sifted through and tried to, especially with 8 out of the 10 plots, pre-programme what could be quite interesting, relevant, highlight what's going on in Birmingham at the minute, taking into account next gen, continuing the MAC staff, process from anti-curate forward and still giving them a platform, but then bringing in sort of BC UMA curators and Clark Gallery and Trove, and then opening it up to a couple of artists that had the potential for sort of curatorial leanings in their practice. So it was this really amazing opportunity to go, you can have a 9-month residency almost at the MAC. This is incredible. The MAC's one of those organisations that as a curator you can go through your life wanting to exhibit there and never getting the opportunity to. And this not only gave you the opportunity to work at the MAC, but to kind of develop a relationship, think about your practice and develop that as well. And it was this amazing platform, as Anti-Curate was for a sort of different type of curators, to have that experience and evolve and have the backing of the MAC's been incredible.
Dan.
Hello.
Tell me about what you were doing.
Well, I touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm kind of like Craig's Robin, really, to the Batman. So a bit of a kind of sounding board. I remember those kind of us walking around the space and really trying to imagine how we could divide the space up. So thinking quite conceptually about physically what is this sense of allotment. How can do we go for 8 plots? Do we go for 10 plots? And really physically being in the space and kind of working out quite methodically how we could, what are the dimensions of the space? How do we work out the kind of framing of the kind of the vinyl? What about the aesthetic? And to really kind of support Craig on that. And I think we'd come to a kind of point when we thought, right, yeah, that's working. And I think it's great, that continuation of working with Keith from D8, because I think he's probably the silent partner in all this, because the identity that he created, I think, really enabled, as it did with Anti-Curate, for that kind of framework to continue and exist. And I think it's kind of quite striking as you walk into the space and you can really see how it's kind of been divided. So I think my role, I would say, is part of those decision makers in terms of steering that sense of framing of a space.
But that's interesting as well, because both of you have been contributors, or kind of like leading on 2 of those, or not necessarily leading, I don't know if you'd say that, but you're part of it as well as the starting point, so could then have an input into, as you were going to be users. So that's quite interesting as well to think about that. Is it possible to just briefly, because I'm going to talk to Charlie later, briefly, or actually both of you, just talk about, once you've done that, how did it work for you in terms of using a